Hello again, and welcome back to week 32 of year 5 of the Religious Education Initiative. This is day 3. We're continuing our way through the book of Acts. So last week we saw St. Paul leave Thessaloniki and Berea, followed by those from the synagogue in Thessaloniki who had opposed him out of jealousy. He therefore left his companions, Silas and Timothy, and presumably Luke, in Berea, while he went on to Athens, although since Luke tells us what he said, maybe Luke went with him. Regardless, here in the city, we will see St. Paul preach one of his more famous, although not necessarily his most successful, sermons. So, this is verse 16 of chapter 17. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means." Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and the imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." At that point, Paul left them. But some of them joined him and became believers, became faithful, including Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Okay, so this is again one of the few chances we get to see St. Paul preaching to pagans. He's not preaching in the synagogue here. He's not preaching to people who know the law of Moses, who've been listening to these things, who are effectively Jews or wanting to be Jews, they just aren't willing to be circumcised. He's talking to the Stoic and Epicurean philosophers. He's talking to the mass of people on the Areopagus, on Mars Hill in Athens. So go figure, he doesn't begin by speaking about the Old Testament. He begins effectively presenting the worldview. He doesn't take anything as presupposed. So he says that there is a God who made the world and everything in it. That there is a Lord of heaven and earth. That's not necessarily something that the Greeks believed, but St. Paul says, "I know you are very religious and you even worship the unknown God. I'm proclaiming him to you. And I'm saying he is actually the God who made everything." So not Zeus, who has an origin story, not Zeus's father, who also has an origin story. St. Paul grabs onto this unknown God that they have an altar to and says, there is a God whom you do not know, who made everything in the world, even the gods that you worship. And he doesn't live in shrines made by human hands. He doesn't need anything from us. He is the one who made all peoples from one ancestor to inhabit the whole earth. He is the one who divided the nations and set them all in their different places. And he did this so that they would search for God, so that they would look for him, as you all are doing. So good job, you. He's kind of congratulating them. And then he quotes their own poets and philosophers saying, but he's not far from us. Your own poets say, we live and move and have our being in him. We are indeed his children. So he's basically saying to the Athenians, you are the children of this God, the unknown God you worship, as much as I am. I'm preaching him to you, but he's for all of us. So now, having said that, he begins to preach against their idolatry, saying, we shouldn't do what you all are doing. It's not a good thing. And he says, God has overlooked this in the times when we were ignorant, but now he commands everyone to repent. So he's saying, so what you're doing, no foul. You were ignorant. You're not ignorant anymore, because here I am telling you what's going on. There is a day when the world will be judged in righteousness, and he will be judged by the man that God has appointed, and he's shown that this man has authority by raising him from the dead. At that point, they're like, what? Raising from the dead? Nah, that doesn't happen. Some of them want to hear more, and some of them trust the Lord and join themselves to Christ and become disciples of St. Paul and become the foundation of the church in Athens. So I say not particularly successful, but hey, he preached to a bunch of pagans in the open, and from that sermon, some people did come to believe. That's remarkable. I don't know if I certainly could do no better, and I'd do much worse. So, but yes, this is the Mars Hill sermon that is very, very much. Often people will imitate it or try to build a sermon style around it, but this is how St. Paul preached in Athens. And we can still visit the place where it happened, which is remarkable. Anyway, God bless you all. It's appropriate that we hear about the resurrection of the dead this week before we prepare to celebrate the Lord's death and resurrection. We'll talk. We'll see you all next week for Holy Week. God bless you all.